Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I'm going to be predicting the entire 2023-2024 NBA season. We're talking where every team finishes 1 through 15 in the standings, who wins each of the major awards. That's MVP, DPOY, Most Improved Player, Rookie of the Year, Coach of the Year, and Clutch Player of the Year. I think that's all of them. There might be a couple more. We'll get to all the awards, I promise. I'm also going to talk about who I have facing off in each conference finals, who I have winning each conference finals, and finally, of course, who wins the 2024 NBA Finals, and who is the NBA Finals MVP. It's a lot to get through, so I'm going to go ahead and not take too long in this intro, but I do want to say real quick, don't hate me if I don't predict your team to finish where you think they're going to. It's really hard to make these predictions. This year in particular, it feels impossible. I've spent days trying to make these predictions. I've switched a number of teams way up and way down the standings. I've gone back and forth on awards, who's going to win the conferences, and everything in between. It truly feels like this season is going to be one of the most unpredictable that we've probably ever seen. So just want to get that out there before we get into this. This season has the potential to be really chaotic. I'm going to try my best to make these predictions. While this upcoming season feels like it's going to be really exciting and unpredictable, the offseason was kind of boring. There were a couple of major trades here and there, but nothing too much else. However, for me, one thing that was really enjoyable about this summer was going to Summer League out there in Vegas. I went with a couple of other basketball content creators, got to play some pickup hoops with them, see some great Summer League games. It was just all around a really good time. But one moment that wasn't super fun was when I got in a car accident. I hopped in a ride to go to the game, and next thing I know, we got rear-ended. Now, I was fine, everyone in the car was fine, but following that situation, I consistently thought about what I would have done if I wasn't fine. What if I had been hurt? I would have had to contact a lawyer about an injury claim, and that seems like a lot of work, and I've got no idea how to start with that. But if I had known that I could get a lawyer fighting for me while just chilling on the couch watching some hoops, it would have been far less intimidating. That's where Morgan & Morgan has come into play. They've modernized the injury law process and made it so that you can submit a claim in 8 clicks or less right from your phone. You can sign contracts, submit medical records, submit case details, even text with your attorney during the case, again, all from your phone. That way you don't have to sit through long law consultations or visit law offices and can instead chill on the couch watching some hoops or maybe another one of my videos. If you ever get in an accident like I did and get significantly injured, it's really important to know how you can get representation if you need it, and a firm like Morgan & Morgan will fight to get you the compensation you deserve. If you're ever in a situation like that, you can check out Morgan & Morgan at forthepeople.com/3cone. It should be on the screen somewhere here if I'm any good at editing, or you can go ahead and call Pound Law on your phone, which is also Pound 529. Again, that's forthepeople.com/3cone, Pound Law on your phone. I want to go ahead and thank Morgan & Morgan for sponsoring this video. Now let's go ahead and get into some predictions. We're going to go ahead and start off with the Eastern Conference because the West is a bit more controversial at this point. We're going to go bottom to top. Also, I'm using enjoypredictions.com to make these predictions. If you want a link to the website, I'll go ahead and leave it in the description or something down below, so you can go ahead and check it out, but if I forget, it's just enjoypredictions.com. First, at the bottom here, I'm going to go with the Washington Wizards. It's the first year of their rebuild. I like Poole over there. I think he could be in for a breakout season. Kuzma's interesting as well. They've got some young talent all over the place, but it's very early for them in this rebuild, and I wouldn't be surprised even if the Wizards jump up a couple of spots in the standings for most of the season. I think by the end of the year, they're probably really trying to bottom out to be one of those bad teams to get one of the top picks. So I'm going to think the Wizards end up here at the bottom of the standings, which is perfect for them in the first year of their rebuild. At 14, I'm going to go with the Detroit Pistons. Their team, I think, could take a jump up here to maybe a play-in team, but I feel like it might just be a bit too early. They were really bad last year, and a lot of that was just not having Cade Cunningham for the season. He feels like he's going to be a big-time breakout player. They've still got Bojan Bogdanovic. Joe Harris is in town now. Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, Isaiah Stewart, like all these interesting young pieces, pretty much all over the place. I also love Asar Thompson's game. To me, I think it's just a bit too early for them to truly make that jump. I worry about all these new pieces trying to fit together alongside Cade, who, again, hardly played last season. I think there's just going to be some growing pains, and eventually, probably within the next couple years, they'll be one of the better teams in the East. I just don't think they're there quite yet. At the 13th spot, I'm going to have the Charlotte Hornets. I think LaMelo Ball has gotten somewhat underrated by people. He's an all-star caliber guard, and last time he was healthy, they were a play-in team. I don't know if they're going to be quite there again. I don't love the talent on this team all around in terms of trying to compete now. I like the young talent between Brandon Miller. Mark Williams, I think, is really underrated. I like that he's the big for LaMelo now. I like PJ Washington over there. They've got a weird mix of vets, too, with, like, Gordon Hayward still in town, somehow Terry Rozier. It's weird over there. I wouldn't be surprised if if they're another team that bottoms out towards the end of the season to try and get a better pick. I'm going to say they drop a couple of spots here to 13 beyond what some people think they could do. I think honestly they could be even a bit lower, but I think LaMelo is really good and he'll at least get them to this 13 spot. At 12, I'm going to have the Toronto Raptors. Pascal Siakam is an all-NBA type player. OG's really good. Jakob Poeltl's good. They've got good talent all over the place on this Raptors team. It's just not a lot of great talent when compared to some other squads. And also, I think there's a real chance they blow it up throughout the season, and if they do so, this team is going to tank really far down the standings if they trade OG or Siakam, who are both impending free agents. I'm anticipating they at least consider that. That leads to a bit of turmoil throughout the season. The Raptors probably will end up being a play-in team, or I think they definitely could, but I'm going to have them missing it right here at the 12 spot. That leaves Orlando as the final team outside the play-in for me. I really wanted to put them up here. I just couldn't make myself do it. I think Paolo's in for a big jump of a season, maybe even Franz Wagner, but I think they're just a year away before making it to the play-in. But if you told me they were a 7 and 8, a 9 seed, any of those play-in spots, maybe even up to a 6 seed if you told me they got some huge jumps, to be honest, I wouldn't even be that surprised. At the 10 spot, I'm going to have the Brooklyn Nets. Mikal Bridges was great as their one option in the second half of last season. I like the defense a lot for this team between him, Ben Simmons, who I'm hopeful is going to bounce back. He's looked good so far in preseason. Nick Claxton, Dorian Finney-Smith, Cam Johnson. I think this team has a lot of potential, but the offense does really scare me, and they were a below 500 team in the second half of last season after they traded Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. I'm not super optimistic about them returning to the playoffs. I think it's certainly possible, but they're going to need Ben Simmons to return to all-star form and get some great play from a number of players to do that. At the 9 spot, I've got the Chicago Bulls. They aren't one of the better teams in the East, but they do still have Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, Nikola Vucevic, some interesting young talent surrounding them like Patrick Williams. Ayo Dosunmu has looked interesting in preseason. Maybe he's going to bounce back. Alex Caruso's a great guard defender. Javon Carter comes in too. Torrey Craig. I think this is a perfectly fine team. They're not great, but I do think that the talent they have will be playing enough to at least get them to the play-in tournament. At the 8th spot, I'm going to have the Miami Heat here, which feels low, but this is where roughly they were last season. They were the 7th seed and then lost in the play-in tournament and ended up being the 8th seed. To be honest, I just don't think the Heat care too much about the regular season and will probably just chill for most of the year before you get to the playoffs, and suddenly they're one of the most terrifying forces you could ever face. They could definitely be higher than this. In fact, I think they might move up a couple of spots now that I'm thinking about it here. You know, I'll go ahead and move them up to 7, and instead I'll put the Pacers at 8. The Pacers are a team that I think is in for a potential leap. I thought about putting them as high as 6 throughout this process, which, as you can see, is still going on in this exact very moment because so many teams are close out there. But the Pacers are a bit younger. They're a bit more inexperienced. Now, they were a playoff team. I think they were the 6th seed before Tyrese went down with injury during last season. So I think they could replicate a lot of that. I like their additions of Bruce Brown and Obi Toppin. We'll talk about Obi Toppin later when I get to my awards section. Miles Turner's really good. There's just a lot of really fun talent on this team, but I will put them below the reigning Eastern Conference champion Miami Heat. Now we've got the top 6 teams who are going to be avoiding the play-in tournament. At the 6th spot, I'm going to go with the Atlanta Hawks. I like how they looked under Quinn Snyder in the second half of last season. I think Trae Young's in for a big bounce back year. Him and DeJounte Murray, I expect to look more cohesive. I still don't love that pairing. I don't know if I ever will, but I think it's going to be a bit better for them. I think Jalen Johnson also could take a jump. AJ Griffin. Overall, I'm just expecting a more cohesive experience from the Hawks under Quinn Snyder this season than we saw under Nate McMillan last year, and that's going to be enough to get them to the 6th spot. My 5th seeded squad is going to be the New York Knicks. This is where they finished last season. I think they end up roughly in the same spot just because I think those 4 teams at the top of the East are still kind of there in terms of regular season success. I like them better in terms of being built for the playoffs than some of those other teams, but in terms of regular season, I think they finish in roughly the same spot. At 4, I've got the Philadelphia 76ers. The James Harden situation is weird. I don't expect them to trade him before the season. We'll see what happens during the year, but at the very least, I think Harden starts the year with the Sixers, and when he's there alongside Embiid, Maxey, Tobias Harris, I think this team is going to be pretty good. So I'm going to have them here at 4, tempering expectations a little bit because, again, we don't know if Harden is just going to start sitting out for some reason, which definitely could cause them to drop to maybe 5 or 6 or even lower. But for right now, I will have them at 4. That leaves Cleveland to go ahead and snag the 3rd seed. I think they're going to be a better regular season team than, say, the Knicks or the Sixers, but I think both those teams could potentially take down the Cavs in a first-round matchup. I could see Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell improving a bit as a backcourt in terms of their chemistry. Evan Mobley could be in for a jump. I like the additions of Strus and Yang. I expect the Cavs to be a great regular season team. We'll see if they can put it together in the playoffs. And that of course leaves the Bucks and the Celtics as, in my opinion, by far the best two teams in the East. And now I have the Bucks finishing as the 1 seed and the Celtics finishing as the 2. I think the Bucks have a little bit less of injury concerns, where the Celtics could miss some time from Porzingis or Horford and suddenly the front court looks really thin. I think ultimately that leads them falling a bit more down the standings, taking some more time to maybe rest some guys than the Bucks, who last year got the 1 seed despite Chris Middleton missing a majority of the season. I think they replicate that feat and again snag a 1 seed, finishing at the top of, again, a very loaded Eastern Conference. Now let's go ahead and do the Western Conference, which is probably where most people are going to start disliking the video. This is a loaded conference from top to bottom. I'm just going to go ahead and get right into it. We'll see what happens. At the 15th spot, I'm going to put the Portland Trailblazers. I don't even think this is that bad of a team. Scoot's really fun. Simons could take a jump. Sharp. I think Ayton could be reinvigorated over here in Portland. Robert Williams is a good piece. Malcolm Brogdon's still there. Jeremy Grant is underrated. Like, this team has a lot of talent. But similar to what I said with the Wizards, because the Blazers are just beginning their rebuild, it wouldn't surprise me at all if towards the end of the season, even if they're somewhat competitive, they just completely bottom out this thing and start sitting guys to try and get one of those top picks in the draft, because that's honestly what they should do. So I think it leads to the Blazers ending up as the 15 seed, even though they're going to play a lot better than that might indicate. For 14, I'm going to have the Spurs. Devin Vassell could be in for a big season. I like Jeremy Sohan, Keldon Johnson, Trey Jones. But of course, it's mainly the Victor Wembanyama effect. I think they're going to be a lot better this season under Vic, who's looked like an absolute monster in the preseason. He's been great, which is to the surprise of nobody, but I think he might be even better than most people are expecting in his rookie campaign. I could see him being a first-year All-Star if the Spurs are competitive enough at the All-Star break. At the 13th seed, I've gone back and forth between the Jazz and the Rockets, but I think I'm going to put the Jazz here at 13. They feel like a more likely team to maybe bottom out towards the end of the season than the Rockets do, because the Rockets just made that big commitment to Dylan Brooks and Fred VanVleet. They've got some big jump potential from Şengün, Jabari Smith Jr., Jalen Green, Ime Udoka's over there. It's tough. I think these two teams could switch spots, certainly, because Lowry is the best player in either of those teams at this point. Walker Kessler is a great rim protector. They've also got, of course, John Collins, who's a bit of an X factor over there. But their backcourt play was really weak when they traded Mike Conley. Maybe Keontae George fixes that, but at the same time, he's a rookie. I don't know. I think those two teams are interchangeable, but I'll go ahead and give Houston the 12th spot and Utah the 13th. Now we get to the top 11, and this is where it gets ridiculous, because I have no idea how one of these 11 teams over here on the side is going to miss the play-in tournament entirely, but somebody has to. And ultimately, the more that I thought about this, the more that I think it really comes down to injuries. What team is actually going to be healthy throughout the season, and who's got the talent to keep themselves afloat even though guys are hurt. Ultimately, I picked the Pelicans to be that 11 seed. And this hurts because I've been a big believer in the Pelicans over the past few years. Last season, I made a video calling Zion a dark horse MVP candidate, and I think he could even do so again because the Pelicans have looked really good when healthy. Even before Zion got hurt last season, they didn't have Ingram, and they were still one of the top seeds in the West. Now, it was very early in the season, so maybe they wouldn't have even sustained that success even if Zion didn't get hurt, but they looked good. And if you told me that the Pelicans finished as a top 4 or 5 seed in the West, I wouldn't even be surprised because they've got that potential. I just don't really trust Zion and Ingram to stay on the court. Trey Murphy's already hurt to begin the season. They just feel like a team that's made of glass waiting to fall apart. And ultimately, when I'm trying to pick between 11 squads that I think should make the play-in tournament, they're the squad that ended up being the odd one out. Next up, at the 10 spot, I've got the Dallas Mavericks. This also hurts because I think they had a good offseason, but behind Luke and Kyrie, their third best player is probably Grant Williams, maybe like a Tim Hardaway Jr., maybe Josh Green if he takes a jump. I just don't like the supporting talent that they have nearly as much as I like some of these other teams. I just think the depth is kind of weak. The defense still feels a bit shaky, although I think it could be better. Maybe they end up grabbing one of those top seeds again, like the Pelicans, really for any of these teams. If you told me they ended up as a top 6-5 seed, I wouldn't be surprised because the West is so close. For me, the Mavericks really just feel like if one of Kyrie or Luka get hurt for a little bit, it's kind of wraps on them making one of those top spots. At the 9 spot, I'm going to put the Minnesota Timberwolves, another team that, again, you tell me they get one of those top seeds, I'm not surprised. I'm not going to keep saying that because it's the case for all of these squads, but the Timberwolves could be a lot better than this. Like I think I mentioned earlier in the video, I can't remember if I did. I picked the Timberwolves to be a 2 seed last year, and I still think they've got the potential to jump a lot behind the play of Anthony Edwards, Karl Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert, Jaden McDaniels, Mike Conley. Now, he looked really good with them last season. I think this Timberwolves team could be way better than I'm projecting them, but there's just so many moving pieces. I don't love their overall depth. That big man duo is still really clunky as a fit. I don't know. We'll have to see how it looks actually on the court, but for right now, I'm going to have Minnesota here at 9. At the 8th spot, I've got the Sacramento Kings. This one also hurts because last season they were the darlings of the NBA. They made a huge jump up to the 3 seed, making the playoffs for the first time in I think it was 16 years. They could certainly be up there in that spot again, but I feel like the defense is going to catch up to them, or I guess the lack of defense is going to catch up to them. They were really healthy last season too compared to a bunch of injured teams. If there's health all across the league again, or if the Kings deal with some injuries, I think they are definitely in for some regression. I don't know. The Kings are one of those teams that I think a lot of people are projecting to drop and certainly could hang out there in the top 3 seeds still. I think they even got better in the offseason, but I think the conference got a lot better as a whole. Fitting in at the 7th spot, I'm going to go with the Memphis Grizzlies. I think this is the second year I'm picking the Grizzlies to drop. They're probably going to prove me wrong again, but this time, I think it's mainly because of the Ja Morant absence. Now, they've been able to hold their own, even though Ja Morant has missed time in the past. But I think having to acclimate Marcus Smart to this team and rely on him a lot to elevate this team without Ja Morant in the lineup is really going to hurt them. Their wing depth is really weak at this point. They're going to be missing Brandon Clark for the whole season, who's a big piece of this team. And even when Ja comes back, now you've got to acclimate Ja Morant to Marcus Smart. Do you run 3 guards out there between Smart, Ja, and Desmond Bane? Do you send Smart to the bench, who starts at that small forward spot when Ja isn't there? There just feels like there's a lot more question marks for this Grizzlies team than there have been in the past. And ultimately, with a West that is this close, I think those few games they might lose without Ja, or while trying to build that chemistry, is going to cause them to fall in the standings. Now, if they make it to the playoffs, they're as dangerous as anybody, but in the regular season, I think they're going to be a little bit down below where they've been in the past. Which leads us to our top 6 teams. And at the 6th spot, I'm putting the Oklahoma City Thunder. Am I a Thunder fan? Yes. This is somewhat of a biased pick, but it's not just me. There are people all across NBA media who are predicting the Thunder to take this leap, and maybe it's because I'm a Thunder fan that I agree with them. Shea looked like an MVP caliber player last year. We won 40 games after Chet Holmgren missed the entire season. He comes back now. Jalen Williams has looked like an all-star caliber player in the future over the course of his second half of his rookie season and in preseason. Giddey looks like he's ready to take a leap. Mark Daigneault's a really good coach. We've got great depth too between Casey Wallace, Vasilije Micic, Kenrich Williams is underrated. Ousmane Dieng has looked really good in preseason. It just feels like we've got a good squad over here. We're young, sure, and I think that could drop us down. Like if we ended up as one of these bottom of the picture playing teams, I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever, but I'm going to go ahead and buy in on the upside. I think we take a big jump above some of these other teams. We make it here as the 6th seed, and this is the beginning of the ascension for Oklahoma City. At the 5 spot, I'm going to put the Los Angeles Clippers, another team that I think could drop dramatically because of injuries, but apparently they're trying to take the regular season really seriously this year. They looked better with Russell Westbrook last year after a rough stretch to begin his tenure. I like some of their supporting pieces. Kawhi and PG are still a great top 2 duo. Ultimately, I don't think they're championship contenders anymore unless they go out and make like a James Harden trade, which is also something I'm thinking about when making these rankings. I don't know if it's going to happen, but if it does, I think it boosts them up the standings a little bit. Ultimately, though, the highest I can put them is 5. The Clippers, I have no idea. They're one of my biggest question marks. I think they could drop to like the bottom of the play-in or be one of these top 5 seeds. At 4, I'm going to put the Golden State Warriors. I think Chris Paul is going to help this team. I'm not betting against Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green. Wiggins missed a majority of last year. They were really bad on the road last season, which I think was kind of an anomaly of sorts. I don't see that replicating. I think they're going to be better than they were last season, make it as a 4 seed, and have home court advantage in the first round of the playoffs. Wrapping things up, 3 seed, I've got the Lakers. They were way better after they made last year's trade deadline acquisitions. Austin Reeves looked really good at the end of last season. LeBron and AD are still one of the league's best duos when healthy. Anthony Davis in particular had one of the better seasons of his career last year. I'm buying in on Lakers hype. I think they're capable of competing with the top teams in the Western Conference and land a 3 seed, finally getting back towards the upper echelon of the standings after a couple of somewhat down years. At the 2 spot, I've got the Phoenix Suns, another team that I think could deal with injuries, but when healthy, are going to be just lethal out there. Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, unreal offensive potential. I like the role players that they picked up between Eric Gordon, Yuta Watanabe, Keita Bates-Diop. Yusuf Nurkic, I think, is a fine fit for this team. I think Ayton's better, but he might work out. Plus, they got Nas Little, who's a depth piece, Grayson Allen. I really like this offseason from them. I think they're going to be one of the best teams in the West. but it won't be enough to match up with the Denver Nuggets, the reigning NBA champions. I still think they get the 1 seed. I think they will falter maybe a little bit. I could see them dropping because they're relying on more young guys who it might take some time for them to really find their legs in these expanded roles. But behind the play of Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., I'm not betting against this Nuggets team not being the 1 seed. I think they go ahead and repeat their feat, getting the second 1 seed in franchise history. Now let's go ahead and talk awards. I'm gonna give you my pick for each category, as well as some honorable mentions that I thought about picking before eventually landing on the guy that I did. We'll start off with the big one in MVP. I think it's going to go to Nikola Jokic. This would make it his 3rd MVP out of 4 years, which would be entirely deserving. There are a lot of people who thought he should have won it last year, which is a narrative that I think is going to play into his favor. If you ask me, I think Embiid was very deserving, but I do think that's going to factor into Jokic getting some more attention for MVP this year. Plus, you combine that with the fact that he's just the best player in the world coming off a monster championship run. He's on a team that I think will be the 1 seed. He puts up monster stats. It feels like a perfect storm for Jokic to again win MVP. It's a boring pick, but to me, it feels like kind of the obvious one. Some other guys I thought about included Giannis and Jason Tatum, who I think could be in the running, but with new star teammates, I think ultimately the media is not going to give them a ton of respect in that regard. Same thing over at the Phoenix Suns. I thought about like Devin Booker or Kevin Durant, but kind of similar situation now that Bradley Beal's in town, and those two, of course, are playing alongside each other. Steph Curry's interesting if the Warriors go high up in the standings. You have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. If the Thunder take a big-time rise, he just finished top 5 in MVP voting. LeBron, Anthony Davis, guys like that. I think there's a lot of guys that could compete for the award this season, but ultimately, Jokic feels like the clear pick. Next, let's talk Defensive Player of the Year. And this one's tough because the guy that I like to win the award, I don't know if he's going to play the 65 games that are necessary, but I'm going to go ahead and just hope that he's actually healthy for once. I'm going to say Anthony Davis finally gets his Defensive Player of the Year award. When he was on the court last year, he looked like the best defensive player in basketball a lot of nights. The Lakers were monsters on that end. I think they could replicate that feat. And if he can just stay on the court, to me, it feels like AD is a very, very likely candidate to take home the gold. I could see Jaren Jackson repeating the feat if he stays on the court. You've got Bam Adebayo over there for Miami if they take a bit of a jump, but he always gets disrespected, so I don't know if that's going to be the case. You have Brook Lopez over there still with the Milwaukee Bucks, Giannis, Evan Mobley if the Cavaliers are again one of the top defenses. Maybe they rise up to a 1 or a 2 seed, just really going in on the regular season, and he wins it. Again, a lot of candidates all over the league, but ultimately, I'm going to bank that Anthony Davis somehow stays healthy, which is probably a bad bet to make, and I'm going to say that he finally gets his depoy. For 6th Man of the Year, I'm going to go ahead and take Immanuel Quickley. He finished 2nd in voting last season, and I think he's got a good chance to win it this year. The Knicks are in position to maybe jump up the standings, and even if they don't, I think Quickley is again going to replicate what he did last season, maybe with more of a spotlight now that I think people have realized how good he is. Plus, Brogdon's over there now in Portland, which is a weird spot. He might be traded throughout the season. And there's a lot of guys that I think could be bench players, but I don't know if they will be. Like Chris Paul, I think could be in for this, but he might start some nights. Norman Powell is interesting as a guy over there in Los Angeles, but I could see him starting with maybe Paul George or Kawhi dealing with injuries. Bobby Portis is another guy I really thought about for this award and is maybe my 2nd pick, but ultimately I am going to go with Quickley, and I'm going to say he gets it done this year after finishing 2nd last season. Meanwhile, for Most Improved Player, I'm going to take Obi Toppin. He's a guy that I've had on my radar ever since he landed in Indiana. When he actually got opportunities with the Knicks, he thrived in those moments. Towards the end of last season, there was a 5-6 game stretch where he looked amazing when Julius Randle was out with injury. Now over here in Indiana, I think he's in a great position to succeed and jump up a lot statistically while helping them take a jump in the standings. He's playing alongside a great playmaker in Tyrese Halliburton who can set him up. He's a great transition player, and the Pacers were one of the best transition teams in the league last season, so this is a system that he can thrive in. I don't know. It feels like every year Most Improved Player is the guy that kind of comes out of nowhere. I know there's guys like Mikal Bridges, you've got Tyrese Maxey, Cade Cunningham, Scotty Barnes, Evan Mobley, Şengün, a number of Rockets guys, Thunder players. All over the league, there are a number of guys, specifically third-year players that could take jumps. But I'm going to go ahead and go off the grid and say Obi Toppin takes home this award, surprising a lot of people. Next up, let's talk Rookie of the Year. And this to me feels like it's going to be one of the best Rookie of the Year races that we've seen in quite some time. I think there are 3 guys at the top that are going to be very closely competing. Scoot Henderson, Chet Holmgren, and of course Victor Wembanyama. All have looked really good in preseason. They have the ability to put up gaudy stats, make big time impacts. But I'm going to pick Chet. mainly because, like you saw my standings portion, I think the Thunder can take a jump. He's going to be the defensive anchor for a Thunder team that I think is going to be really good defensively. He's looked really good offensively too, grabbing boards, knocking down threes. I just think Chet's impact is going to be huge. He's going to have the numbers and the team success that ultimately may get him a little bit higher in this race than a guy like Vic or Scoot. If either of those guys win it, I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever. To me, it's really close between those three. Next up, we've got Clutch Player of the Year, and I'm going to go with Damian Lillard for this award. He's been consistently one of the most clutch players in the league, and now he's on a Bucks team where he's actually going to be able to find some type of significant success. This new spotlight on a player who's always been clutch feels like a good recipe for him winning that award. I don't know if playing alongside Giannis might take away from that a little bit. It's the second season of this award existing, so we haven't quite figured out how voting is going to work, but Dame just being a clutch player, again, on a really good team, I think sets him up well to be a contender for this. Fox, again, will be in that conversation too. I think Shea's an interesting candidate. Last year, guys like DeMar DeRozan were really good in the clutch. Jalen Brunson. There's a number of players all over the league. This one is the hardest to predict, but I'm just going to go with Dame. And finally, for Coach of the Year, I'm again going to go with a Thunder guy in Mark Daigneault. He finished top 3 in Coach of the Year voting last season, and that was with us as a 10 seed. If we take a jump to the 6th spot like I think we can, I expect him to get widespread consideration with a really young team that I expect to be pretty good defensively, which isn't typical of young squads. A lot of young players could blossom too under his tutelage. I just think Mark's a really good coach. He's got some attention on him, and if the Thunder take a jump, he's in prime position to take home the award. In terms of honorable mentions for Coach of the Year, I think we could see maybe an Adrian Griffin if the Bucks ball out. If the Celtics are ridiculous, they win like 65 games or something, Joe Mazzulla could be in consideration. Maybe Frank Vogel over there with the Suns. Maybe Michael Malone gets some love now with the Denver Nuggets. I don't know. It's hard to predict because it feels like a lot of these coaches have really talented teams, and typically that takes away from them being able to win the award. It's one of those weird ones. Finally, I've got my conference finals and NBA finals predictions. Out in the West, I've got the Denver Nuggets facing off against the Phoenix Suns. This would be an incredible battle. You've got Nikola Jokic, Michael Porter Jr., Jamal Murray, Aaron Gordon, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, this 5-man group that just dominated the rest of the league en route to a finals, facing off in a second-round rematch against a new-look Suns team that feels more dangerous than ever. Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, Yusuf Nurkic is over there. A bunch of interesting role players that they added, like Eric Gordon, Keita Bates-Diop, Yuta Watanabe, amongst others. I talked about that all earlier. These two teams are both really, really good, and I think it would be amazing hoops. You've got the Nuggets who have this amazing offense that can directly target that kind of weak Suns defense, but the Suns, meanwhile, also have an amazing offense going up against the Nuggets' somewhat shaky defense. It's close. I think this series could go either way. It'll probably go 6-7 games. But I'm going to take the Denver Nuggets to go ahead and repeat as Western Conference champs. I don't want to bet against Nikola Jokic, the best player in the world. I saw what he did last time. I saw what Jamal Murray did last playoff run where he turned into one of the best players in the world too. I'm not going to bet against them. I think their depth is a bit shakier than last year, which ultimately could be their downfall. But I'm going to say they go ahead and repeat as West champions, making it back to the NBA Finals. Meanwhile, over there in the East, I think to the surprise of nobody, I have the Milwaukee Bucks facing off against the Boston Celtics. They're clearly the best two teams in the East, if you ask me, and this might be a second-round matchup if the standings look a bit different, but whenever they face off, that will be the true Eastern Conference Finals. They're both loaded with star talent. They've got not great supporting cast, but I think somewhat underrated ones. They've got pieces that counter each other's. It's going to be a bloodbath between these two teams in a series that ultimately I expect to go to at least 6 games, more likely 7. I've battled back and forth between who I think would win this series, but ultimately, I think I'm going to lean the Celtics. I like Jrue Holiday and Derek White as a counter for Damian Lillard. I think Kristaps Porzingis is an extremely underrated acquisition for this team too. They've got Al Horford, who has had some success going up against Giannis in the past. Giannis is still the biggest threat, in my opinion, to this team. It's going to be really hard to slow him down, but ultimately I think they'll do just enough to get past them, make it to the NBA Finals, to face off against the Denver Nuggets. So in this scenario, we have a Boston Celtics Denver Nuggets Finals that would probably be incredible. These are two of the best teams in the league going into this upcoming season. You've got the Nuggets looking to repeat and establish themselves as a burgeoning dynasty while pushing Nikola Jokic rapidly up the all-time rankings. For the Celtics, they're looking to get their first ring since the Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce days, and this might be their best chance in this Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown era that we've seen so far. So the question is, who wins in this matchup? And ultimately, my final prediction is going to be that the Boston Celtics win this year's NBA Finals in a 7-game series over the Denver Nuggets, with Jason Tatum winning Finals MVP. I like the versatility of this Celtics team to slow down the Nuggets. I like their ability to go with some size if they need to slow down Jokic more with Porzingis and Al Horford. I like their ability to go with a great defensive backcourt of Jrue Holiday and Derek White if Jamal Murray is torching them. I think Tatum and Jaylen Brown can also hold their own defensively against this great all-around Nuggets offense. The Celtics offense is also just incredibly dynamic and can give the Nuggets defense some problems. I think the Celtics are really, really good. Like, I don't think people realize how good this squad is if they can stay healthy, which is certainly a concern for them. That's the biggest potential derailing factor. But I think if they stay healthy, the Celtics are going to go ahead and win the 2024 finals, taking down the Denver Nuggets and finally raising the Larry O'Brien trophy again. So yeah, those are my full NBA season predictions. This video took me a really long time to set up and record. So if you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It helps the channel out a ton. Also comment down below letting me know some of your predictions. Where's your favorite team going to finish? Who wins each conference? Who wins the NBA Finals? What was I right about? What was I wrong about? Everything in between. Would love to hear some of your feedback about these predictions. And again, what seems like one of the most unpredictable seasons of all time. As always, I really appreciate y'all watching all throughout this offseason. The season is right around the corner. There's going to be coverage nonstop once we get there. So make sure to stay tuned into the channel over this next week or so and all throughout the NBA season. But for now, appreciate y'all watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.